If we were to take a monkey out of its natural environment and put it into a cage, we would feel that there's something deeply wrong about that. Even if the monkey could live longer in the cage or could have better health treatments or better food options, it would feel weird taking a monkey out of where it evolved to be in and putting it in a kind of unnatural environment. So while that makes sense, the critical problem is that humans can be seen as the monkeys in the cage now. Humans society now lives in tiny apartment rooms by themselves, cooking their own meals. Maybe they have a family, right? They're with their family, but they're still largely sheltered from everybody else, doing their own things on their own devices all the time, working to make a name for themselves. And so much of our action now is individualized. And this provides a stark contrast to our evolutionary origins. Even if we think to our ancestry and look at the chimpanzees, which is our closest relative, we are 97 to 99% related to them. And so our lifestyles are actually supposed to be kind of similar. As human hunter-gatherers, we largely lived in small communal groups of under 150 people and did everything together, including hunting, eating, cooking, sleeping, celebrating, and even sharing partners together. And so the lifestyle we had originally, which is what the one you can say we evolved for, and the one we have now are completely different. And here comes this contradiction. We know that for the chimpanzees that we would not take them out of the natural environment because it feels weird, but yet we are doing that to ourselves. And not only are we thinking that it's okay, we are actually thinking that it's progressing society. So the contradiction is that we're simultaneously believing this current society we live in is progressing society, while our kind of evolutionary background and kind of more of a rational analysis will say that we are going farther and farther away from how we were supposed to live. So how could we then say we're believing that this society is actually progressing? If it was true that the past society, the evolutionary one that we evolved for, is the better one, why do we think that the current one we're in right now is progressing? And I say that this has to do with the notion of the ego, the illusory self. So the illusory self will make it so that we want to validate our ego. And to validate our ego, we can use whatever sort of desires we have around us. And in terms of the culture creates something I call delusional desires. Delusional desires can either go against or with your sort of bodily desires, which is how you want to be acting. But in the case of modern society, the delusional desires are very far against our body desires. But the case is here that the delusional desires are still things that can satisfy and validate the fictitious ego. And so if we believe that society values money, status, and fame, our egos will believe it can be validated by money, status, and fame. The problem here arises because the ego is fictitious. It wanting to be satisfied is baseless. Nothing's actually being satisfied. It's completely illusory. But yet, because we're trying to satisfy it, we're now attributing desires that are against our own to kind of validate the ego. So we can believe money is actually important for us when the only thing it really does is kind of push us away from what we really want to be doing. People who reach midlife crises and burnouts are going through these phases of believing that the delusional desires are good for them, money, fame, power, status are all good for them, while simultaneously putting their bodily desires or what they really want to be doing against itself. We sacrifice our health, our socialization, our flowing of love for these things that we believe are important for us, and the end effect is that they deeply affect us. So this is why society then thinks that society is progressing, or that the current system is progressing, is because we believe, since we have delusional desires and we're trying to satisfy the ego, that these are the things that make us important. If someone can create the next technological item, if someone can make the next amount of money, they will be satisfied and they'll be deemed by the society and by their own ego that they are important, that they are worthy. And so removing those criteria, removing those delusional desires will then make people deeply scared because there's nothing that easily to grasp onto that will satisfy their so-called ego. And this comes really apparent when we have cases of people who coming from more of a hunter-gatherer tribe and coming into the big cities and seeing that it's just completely wrong, such in the case as in The Falling Sky by David Kopenawa, where this kind of a shaman comes out from the Amazon tribe and goes into the modern New York City, and he sees everything feels deeply wrong. This capitalist system, people are kind of out of their own minds and kind of blindfolded to follow something that is totally against them, and yet they're doing that. And so from the outside perspective, where they do not have the delusional desires built in as values and values into their kind of mind, they'll see the apparent wrongness of that system. They'll see that following these sort of delusional desires of money, fame, are completely baseless and wrong, but it is because we're born into that environment to want to value that sort of system and those core values that we actually start to cling onto them and depend upon them for validation of our ego. And that becomes a critical issue when we think about what is happening now. If we go back to this monkey in a cage example, we think that monkey in a cage is bad. And now for the human race, humans are the monkeys in a cage, but the thing is we put ourselves in here and we are thinking that it's good. So imagine if the chimpanzee got himself into the cage and suffered because of it. It would seem wildly wrong. It's clearly wrong. Why are you doing that? Chimpanzees should not want to go in the cage, should go back into nature. But for humans, this is exactly what's happening. Humans took themselves out of the natural environment and slowly walked and trapped themselves in a cage and started to suffer deeply from that. And so this question becomes again, if the chimpanzees in the cage is so wrong, why do we not think ourselves to be completely wrong as we're putting ourselves into our own cages? And I hope that I gave somewhat of an explanation to explain that. But this is really it should be a mind-bending sort of thought, because it basically just shows that the world we live in is not progressing and good in the way it is. There are a few books that kind of illustrate this idea, Walden and Brave New World, if that's sort of your interests. Thank you.